Stephen Chen sat quietly in the bustling emergency room, his 12-year-old son Tommy whimpering beside him. The boy clutched his swollen arm, tears streaming down his face after falling from his bicycle. They had been waiting for over 2 hours, watching as other patients, who arrived after them, were called in. Stephen tried to catch the attention of the staff multiple times, but his concerns were met with dismissive glances. When they finally got to see Dr. Reynolds, the interaction lasted barely 2 minutes. The doctor barely looked at Tommy's arm, instead fixating on his phone. "It's probably just a bruise. Put some ice on it and go home," he said curtly, already turning away. Stephen attempted to explain how Tommy had landed awkwardly and heard a crack, but Dr. Reynolds cut him off. "Listen, if you want a second opinion, go to another hospital. We have real emergencies to deal with here," the doctor said, his tone dripping with condescension. As they were being ushered out, Stephen noticed a white family that had just arrived being immediately taken to an examination room, their child's injury appearing less severe than Tommy's. Something in Stephen snapped, but not in anger. Years of experiencing subtle discrimination had taught him to document everything. He pulled out his phone and started recording the scene, making sure to capture how other patients were being treated differently. He also requested the hospital's patient complaint form and carefully noted down the time, date, and names of all staff involved. As they were leaving, they ran into Dr. Lisa Zhang, who was just starting her shift. She noticed Tommy's obvious distress and Stephen's troubled expression. Unlike Dr. Reynolds, she stopped to listen. After hearing their experience and examining Tommy properly, she discovered he had indeed fractured his arm and needed immediate treatment. Dr. Zhang not only treated Tommy, but also helped Stephen file a formal complaint with the hospital administration. She connected him with the hospital's patient advocacy office and suggested he document everything that had happened. "This isn't about revenge," she told him. "It's about ensuring every patient receives equal care." The hospital administration took the complaint seriously, especially with the clear documentation Stephen had gathered. They launched an investigation into Dr. Reynolds' pattern of behavior, revealing this wasn't an isolated incident. The security footage from the ER waiting room corroborated Stephen's account. Within a week, the hospital board called Stephen for a meeting. They apologized for his family's experience and outlined the concrete steps they were taking to address discrimination in their emergency department. This included mandatory bias training for all staff, new protocols for patient waiting times, and regular audits of patient care patterns. The story caught the attention of local healthcare advocacy groups, who invited Stephen to share his experience at community meetings. He began working with them to develop better communication channels between the hospital and minority communities. Dr. Reynolds was required to undergo extensive sensitivity training and mentoring. Initially resentful, he gradually began to recognize his unconscious biases after seeing the documented pattern of his behavior. The experience led him to reflect on his approach to patient care. Tommy's arm healed well under Dr. Zhang's care, but the impact of their experience reached far beyond his recovery. The hospital implemented new training programs and hired more diverse staff. Stephen became a regular speaker at medical conferences, sharing how constructive action could lead to positive institutional change. The incident transformed from a potential moment of conflict into an opportunity for meaningful reform. Instead of seeking revenge, Stephen's measured response helped create lasting changes that would benefit countless future patients. His story became an example of how documenting discrimination and working through proper channels could lead to real systemic improvements. Dr. Zhang later commented that Stephen's approach had done more to improve patient care than any angry confrontation could have achieved. The hospital now stands as a model for other medical facilities, showing how addressing bias requires not just policy changes, but a fundamental shift in institutional culture. "Sometimes the best revenge is making sure nobody else has to go through what you experienced," Stephen would often say when sharing his story. His experience showed that real change comes not from dramatic acts of retaliation, but from persistent, documented advocacy for better systems. The story ends with Tommy, now fully recovered, volunteering at the same hospital, helping to make other young patients feel comfortable and welcomed. The emergency room that once turned them away had become a place where every patient, regardless of their background, could expect to receive equal, high-quality care. Through this experience, both the hospital staff and the community learned that addressing discrimination requires patience, documentation, and a commitment to systemic change rather than personal vengeance. The real victory wasn't in punishing one doctor, but in creating a better healthcare environment for everyone. The story's transformation reached beyond the hospital walls. News of Stephen's approach to handling discrimination spread through social media, not through angry posts or calls for boycotts, but through thoughtful discussions about healthcare equality. People began sharing their own experiences, creating a ripple effect that caught the attention of healthcare administrators across the state. The hospital board, impressed by how Stephen had handled the situation, invited him to join their newly formed Patient Advocacy Committee. At first, he hesitated, wondering if this was just for show. But after meeting with other committee members and seeing their genuine commitment to change, he accepted the position. During one of the committee meetings, Stephen shared something that struck everyone silent. "You know, that day when Dr. Reynolds dismissed us, I was angry enough to want to post everything online and demand he be fired. But then I thought about my son watching me. What lesson would that teach him? That when faced with injustice, our only response should be anger." His words resonated with the committee, especially when they reviewed the hospital's complaint history. They discovered a pattern. Many patients had similar experiences, but didn't know how to address them constructively. Some had simply given up on seeking medical care, leading to worse health outcomes. The committee worked with Stephen to develop a clear, accessible system for reporting discriminatory treatment. They set up a patient advocacy hotline and trained staff to recognize and respond to bias incidents. The hospital even created a mobile app where patients could rate their experience and provide feedback in real time. Dr. Zhang, who had initially helped Stephen and Tommy, became a key ally in implementing these changes. She organized workshops where medical staff could hear directly from patients about their experiences. These sessions weren't about blame or shame, they focused on understanding and improvement. One day, about 3 months after the incident, Dr. Reynolds approached Stephen in the hospital cafeteria. The doctor had just finished his mandatory training, but more importantly, he'd spent time reflecting on his behavior. "I didn't see it before," he admitted, his voice heavy with realization. "I thought I was treating everyone the same, but the numbers don't lie." The data collected through the new reporting system had shown clear patterns in patient wait times and treatment decisions. It wasn't just about one doctor or one incident, it was about unconscious biases that had become embedded in the system. By addressing these patterns openly and honestly, the hospital began to see measurable improvements in patient care across all demographics. Tommy's story became part of the hospital's orientation program, not as a cautionary tale about what not to do, but as an example of how positive change could emerge from difficult situations. New doctors and nurses learned about the importance of listening to patients and recognizing their own potential biases. The local medical school took notice and invited Stephen to speak to their students. "Medicine isn't just about treating symptoms," he told them. "It's about seeing the whole person in front of you, regardless of their background. Every patient deserves to be heard and treated with respect." Other hospitals in the region began reaching out, wanting to learn from their experience. The Patient Advocacy Program became a model for healthcare facilities across the state. Stephen found himself traveling to different cities, sharing his story, and helping other institutions develop similar programs. Throughout all this, Tommy continued his recovery, but the experience had changed him too. He started a club at his school focused on healthcare awareness and equality. The young boy who had once been dismissed in the ER was now helping other kids understand their rights as patients. The most powerful moment came 6 months later when a young family had an experience similar to Stephen and Tommy's. But this time, the system worked differently. The new protocols kicked in, patient advocates stepped in, and the situation was addressed immediately. The family received proper care without having to fight for it. Looking back, Stephen realized that what could have been a story of revenge had become something much more meaningful, a story of systemic change and community healing. The hospital had transformed from a place of frustration and bias to a center of excellence in equitable healthcare. Dr. Reynolds and Stephen eventually became unlikely allies in promoting healthcare equality. Their story showed that change doesn't always come from confrontation, but from a willingness to learn, adapt, and work together for something better. The real victory wasn't in punishment or revenge. It was in creating a healthcare system that worked better for everyone. As Tommy's arm healed completely, the scar became a reminder not of that difficult day in the ER, but of how one family's response to discrimination had helped create positive change for their entire community. Their story continues to inspire others to address inequality through constructive action rather than destructive reaction. The impact of Stephen and Tommy's story continued to grow in unexpected ways. One morning, while Stephen was preparing for another hospital committee meeting, he received an email that made his heart skip a beat. It was from a national healthcare organization interested in featuring their story in an upcoming documentary about transforming medical care. The film crew arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, setting up their equipment in the same emergency room where it all began. As Stephen walked through those sliding doors, he couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The waiting room now had clear signs in multiple languages explaining patient rights. Digital displays showed current wait times, and patient advocates in bright blue vests were easily visible. During the filming, they interviewed Dr. Reynolds, who had undergone a remarkable transformation. "I used to think being a good doctor meant treating everyone exactly the same," he explained, his voice carrying genuine understanding. "But I've learned that treating everyone the same doesn't always mean treating everyone fairly. Sometimes patients need different approaches based on their unique situations." The documentary team captured a touching moment when a young patient recognized Tommy from his school healthcare club. The child, nervous about getting treatment, immediately relaxed when Tommy shared his own story. "See this?" Tommy said, showing his healed arm. "This hospital fixed my arm, and then we helped fix the hospital too." Stephen's phone kept buzzing with messages from other healthcare facilities across the country. They wanted to know more about the patient advocacy program he had helped develop. Some hospitals had tried similar initiatives but struggled to maintain momentum. They were especially interested in how Stephen's approach had turned potential adversaries into allies. The filming process revealed new stories that even Stephen hadn't known about. A nurse shared how the changes had empowered staff to speak up when they noticed unfair treatment. A scheduling coordinator explained how the new system helped them track and prevent discriminatory patterns in appointment assignments. During one particularly moving interview, Dr. Zhang described the ripple effects of that initial incident. "What's remarkable," she said, "is how this has changed the way we train new medical staff. We're not just teaching them about medicine anymore, we're teaching them about humanity." The documentary crew followed Tommy to one of his school club meetings. Students from all backgrounds gathered to learn about healthcare rights and advocacy. Tommy had created a simple but effective role-playing exercise where students practiced speaking up for themselves and others in medical situations. Back at the hospital, the Patient Advocacy Committee was reviewing their quarterly data. The numbers told a powerful story. Patient satisfaction scores had improved across all demographic groups, wait times had become more equitable, and complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped significantly. But more importantly, health outcomes were improving as people felt more comfortable seeking early medical care. Stephen was invited to speak at a national healthcare conference. Standing at the podium, he looked out at hundreds of medical professionals eager to learn from his experience. The easy path would have been to demand punishment, he told them. The harder path was to stay and work for change. But that harder path has helped thousands of patients, not just my son. The documentary captured a surprise reunion between Stephen and the hospital security guard who had been working the day of the initial incident. The guard remembered feeling helpless as he watched the situation unfold. Now, as part of the new protocols, security staff were trained to recognize and report potential discrimination, becoming part of the solution rather than silent observers. Tommy's school project expanded into a citywide youth healthcare advocacy network. Students from different schools began collaborating on projects to improve medical care access in their communities. They created simple, clear videos explaining patient rights in various languages, which now play on screens in waiting rooms across the city. The story took another unexpected turn when a medical school professor contacted Stephen about developing a curriculum module based on their experience. "We want future doctors to learn these lessons before they ever set foot in an emergency room," the professor explained. "Your story helps them understand the real-world impact of their actions." As the documentary neared completion, the film crew captured a moment that perfectly symbolized the transformation. A new family arrived at the emergency room, looking anxious and uncertain. They were immediately greeted by a patient advocate who spoke their language, guided through the intake process with respect, and kept informed about their expected wait time. The system that had once failed was now working as it should. The documentary's final scene showed Stephen and Tommy sitting on their front porch, looking at old photos from the day of the accident. "You know what, Dad?" Tommy said, tracing the faint scar on his arm. "Sometimes the best medicine isn't just what fixes your body, it's what helps fix the whole system." The film ended with a powerful message. Real change doesn't come from dramatic confrontations or viral social media posts. It comes from people willing to stay engaged, work through difficult conversations, and build bridges instead of walls. Stephen and Tommy's story had become more than just a tale of overcoming discrimination. It had become a blueprint for transforming healthcare from the inside out. A year after the documentary's release, Stephen received an unexpected invitation. A prestigious medical school on the other side of the country wanted him to be the keynote speaker at their annual Healthcare Ethics Symposium. As he packed his bags, he reflected on how far they'd come from that difficult day in the emergency room. During his flight, Stephen reviewed some recent emails on his tablet. Hospitals across 3 different states had successfully implemented programs based on their model. Each success story included personal touches that made him smile, like the hospital that gave their patient advocates rainbow-colored badges, making them easy to spot in crowded waiting rooms. The symposium was being held in a grand auditorium filled with medical students, practicing physicians, and healthcare administrators. As Stephen walked onto the stage, he noticed Tommy's story playing silently on the large screens behind him. The images showed their journey from that tense day in the ER to the positive changes that followed. "Sometimes the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes," Stephen began, his voice steady and clear. "But those changes only happen when we choose to respond to difficulty with determination instead of destruction." The audience leaned forward, captivated by the authenticity in his words. He shared a new story he hadn't told before, about a letter he'd received from a young medical student. The student had been ready to quit medical school after witnessing discrimination in clinical rotations. But after seeing the documentary, they decided to stay and become part of the solution, eventually becoming a patient advocate trainer. During the question and answer session, a hospital administrator stood up and shared something surprising. Their hospital had faced a similar situation, but instead of addressing it constructively, they had tried to bury the incident. The results were disastrous. Staff morale plummeted, patient trust eroded, and the community became increasingly hostile. "What made you choose a different path?" the administrator asked Stephen. The auditorium fell silent, waiting for his response. Stephen thought about it carefully before answering. "I looked at my son's face that day," he said, "and realized I had a choice. I could teach him that change comes from destruction, or I could show him that real change comes from dedication." Back at their original hospital, Tommy had started a new initiative. Working with Dr. Jung, he organized monthly meetings where young patients could share their experiences with hospital staff. These conversations weren't about complaints, they were about understanding and improvement. Even the youngest patients had insights that helped make the hospital better. The symposium organizers surprised Stephen by bringing in Dr. Reynolds via video call. The doctor, now working as a healthcare equity consultant, shared how their experience had changed his entire approach to medicine. "I thought I was just treating symptoms," he admitted. "Now I understand that healing involves seeing and respecting the whole person." During a break, Stephen wandered through the medical school's halls, looking at the faces of future doctors in their graduation photos. He spotted a new addition to their curriculum posted on a bulletin board, a required course in cultural competency and healthcare equity inspired by their story. The most touching moment came when a group of first-year medical students approached Stephen after his speech. They had started a study group dedicated to understanding healthcare disparities and developing solutions. They called themselves Tommy's Team, and their enthusiasm for creating positive change was contagious. One of the symposium's organizers shared some remarkable statistics. Hospitals that had adopted their advocacy model showed improved patient outcomes across all demographics. More importantly, staff retention rates had increased, and workplace satisfaction scores were higher. Making healthcare more equitable wasn't just right, it was also more effective. Stephen used his closing remarks to share a vision for the future. He described a healthcare system where every patient feels heard, where staff are empowered to speak up, and where mistakes are seen as opportunities for improvement rather than reasons for punishment. The journey isn't over, he said, but we've proven that positive change is possible. That evening, Stephen video called Tommy to share how the day had gone. His son was excited but not surprised by the positive response. "You know what, Dad?" Tommy said, "Remember when you told me that the best revenge is making sure nobody else has to go through what we did? Well, it looks like we're winning." As Stephen flew home the next day, he thought about all the lives touched by their story. What could have been a moment of anger and retaliation had instead sparked a movement for positive change in healthcare. The real victory wasn't in punishing one doctor or changing one hospital, it was in showing how constructive action could transform an entire system. The story continues to inspire others, showing that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't revenge or violence, it's the patient, persistent work of creating positive change. Through their experience, Stephen and Tommy had helped write a new chapter in the ongoing story of healthcare transformation, one where every patient's dignity and humanity are recognized and respected. The story entered a new chapter when Stephen received a call from a National Healthcare Policy Committee. They wanted to use their experience as a model for new federal guidelines on patient care. As he sat in his living room reviewing the invitation, Tommy burst in with exciting news from his school's healthcare advocacy club. They had just won a state-level award for community impact. The policy committee meeting was held in a large conference room filled with healthcare leaders from across the country. Stephen noticed something different about this gathering. The room wasn't just filled with administrators and doctors. There were nurses, patient advocates, and even former patients who had experienced discrimination in healthcare settings. During his presentation, Stephen shared a powerful new development from their hospital. The emergency room that had once turned them away had become a teaching center for patient-centered care. Hospitals from different states were sending their staff to learn about their advocacy program and inclusive treatment protocols. One attendee shared a story that brought tears to many eyes. Their rural hospital had implemented Stephen and Tommy's model, leading to an unexpected breakthrough with a community that had historically avoided seeking medical care due to past discrimination. Trust was slowly rebuilding, and lives were literally being saved because people now felt safe coming to the hospital. The committee was particularly interested in how the program had improved efficiency. Contrary to initial concerns about slowing down emergency room operations, the new protocols had actually reduced overall wait times. When patients felt heard and respected, they were more likely to provide accurate information, leading to faster and more accurate diagnosis. Back home, Tommy had started mentoring younger students interested in healthcare advocacy. He organized a workshop where kids could practice speaking up about their medical needs. "Remember," he told them, "being brave doesn't mean being angry. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying calm and working for change." Dr. Zhang shared an interesting observation during a follow-up interview for the documentary. She noticed that medical students who rotated through their emergency room were scoring higher on their empathy assessments. The hospital's environment had become a living classroom for compassionate care. The policy committee was impressed by how the program had spread beyond the original hospital. Small clinics had adapted the model to fit their needs, proving that positive change wasn't limited to large institutions with big budgets. It was about changing attitudes and approaches, not just implementing expensive systems. Stephen received a touching letter from a family in another state. They had faced a similar situation but had seen the documentary about Tommy's story. Instead of reacting with anger, they'd followed the blueprint for constructive change. Their local clinic had now become a model of inclusive care for their community. During a school presentation, Tommy shared something that made Stephen incredibly proud. "You know what's cool?" he told his classmates. "When something bad happens, you can either let it make you bitter, or you can use it to make things better. My dad taught me that the second choice is always stronger." The policy committee meeting concluded with a revolutionary proposal. They wanted to create a national certification program for healthcare equity based on the principles developed from Stephen and Tommy's experience. hospitals could earn recognition for implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols and patient advocacy programs. One evening, while reviewing the proposal at home, Stephen found Tommy looking at old photos from the day of his injury. "Dad," Tommy said thoughtfully, "remember how angry we were that day? I'm glad we chose to do something different. Look how many people it's helped." The story had another unexpected turn when Dr. Reynolds was invited to join the policy committee. His perspective as someone who had transformed from being part of the problem to part of the solution was invaluable. He could speak firsthand about the importance of addressing unconscious bias in healthcare. Their hospital received visitors from international healthcare organizations interested in implementing similar programs. The simple idea of treating every patient with dignity and respect, backed by concrete protocols and accountability measures, was proving to be universal. Stephen's phone buzzed with a message from the young medical student who had almost quit. They were now completing their residency and had started a mentoring program for minority medical students. The cycle of positive change was expanding, touching more lives with each passing day. As the policy committee wrapped up its final session, they reviewed the data one more time. The numbers were clear. Hospitals that had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination programs showed better patient outcomes, higher staff satisfaction, and improved community trust. What had started as one family's response to discrimination had grown into a movement for positive change in healthcare. The most powerful moment came when a young emergency room doctor approached Stephen after the meeting. "I was ready to quit medicine," they admitted. "The system seemed too broken to fix, but your story showed me that change is possible when we choose the path of persistence over punishment." 2 years after the policy committee's recommendations were implemented, Stephen and Tommy were invited to a national healthcare conference. The event was special. It was the first ceremony recognizing hospitals that had earned the new Healthcare Equity Certification, a program directly inspired by their story. The conference hall was packed with healthcare professionals from every state. As Stephen looked around, he saw name tags from small rural clinics sitting next to representatives from major city hospitals. Their story had bridged gaps not just between patients and doctors, but between different types of healthcare facilities. During the opening session, a surprising guest appeared on screen. It was the security guard from that fateful day in the emergency room. He had gone back to school and was now working as a patient advocate coordinator. "Watching their story unfold taught me that anyone can be part of positive change," he shared, his voice full of emotion. Tommy took the stage to present an award to a children's hospital that had created an innovative program based on their model. The hospital had developed a special app where young patients could rate their experience using emoji faces, making it easier for kids to communicate their needs and concerns. A doctor from a small town stood up during the Q&A session and shared something powerful. After implementing the new protocols, they discovered that many local families had been traveling hours to bigger cities for basic care simply because they didn't trust their local hospital. Now, those same families were comfortable seeking care closer to home. The conference featured a special panel discussion about the ripple effects of positive change. Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Jung sat together, discussing how their emergency room had transformed. "The most remarkable thing," Dr. Jung noted, "is how the culture of care has shifted. It's not just about following new rules. It's about seeing each patient as a whole person." During lunch, Stephen met a group of medical students who had created a study club focused on healthcare equity. They had analyzed hundreds of patient stories, learning from both positive and negative experiences. Their research showed that hospitals with strong advocacy programs had better health outcomes across all patient groups. Tommy's school club had grown into a regional network of young healthcare advocates. They organized virtual meetings where students from different schools could share ideas and experiences. One of their initiatives, creating multilingual welcome videos for emergency rooms, had been adopted by hospitals in 3 different states. The conference organizers unveiled a new training program that would be required for all hospital staff, from doctors to cleaning crews. It was based on the simple but powerful idea that every person in a healthcare setting plays a role in making patients feel respected and cared for. A touching moment came when a family approached Stephen during a break. They had faced discrimination at their local hospital but had seen the documentary about Tommy's story. Instead of giving up or fighting back with anger, they worked with hospital administration to implement changes. "Your story gave us a blueprint for turning pain into progress," they said. The afternoon sessions focused on practical implementations. Hospitals shared their experiences adapting the program to different settings, from busy urban emergency rooms to small rural clinics. The key lesson was that while the specific tools might vary, the core principles of respect, communication, and accountability remained the same. Dr. Reynolds presented data showing how the new protocols had actually improved efficiency. When patients felt heard and respected from the start, they were more likely to provide complete information about their symptoms. This led to more accurate diagnosis and better treatment plans. Stephen received news during the conference that their story would be included in a new medical school curriculum. Future doctors would learn about their experience not just as a cautionary tale, but as a model for how to create positive change within the healthcare system. Tommy's presentation about youth involvement in healthcare advocacy received a standing ovation. He shared how young people could be powerful agents of change, often seeing solutions that adults might miss. His school club had created simple but effective tools for helping kids communicate with healthcare providers. The conference concluded with a ceremony celebrating hospitals that had earned the new certification. As Stephen watched representatives from different facilities receive their recognition, he thought about how far they'd come from that difficult day in the emergency room. What could have been a story of anger and revenge had become a catalyst for systemic change. During the closing dinner, a healthcare administrator shared something profound. "You know what's remarkable about this story? It shows that real change doesn't come from tearing things down. It comes from people willing to stay engaged, work through difficult conversations, and build something better together." The evening ended with a surprise video compilation of patients sharing how the new programs had impacted their care. Families from different backgrounds and communities all expressed the same sentiment. They finally felt seen and heard in their healthcare experiences. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the emergency room, and Stephen found himself standing in the exact same spot, but everything was different now. The hospital was hosting a special anniversary event celebrating the transformation in healthcare that had started with one family's choice to respond to discrimination with determination rather than destruction. The emergency room walls now displayed a beautiful mural painted by local students, showing a diverse group of people being cared for with dignity and respect. Digital screens showed wait times in multiple languages, and patient advocates in bright vests moved through the area, making sure everyone felt supported and heard. Tommy, now a teenager, stood beside his father, greeting visitors who had come from across the country to see firsthand how their hospital had become a model for inclusive healthcare. His healed arm served as a powerful reminder of where their journey began, but his confident smile showed how far they'd come. Dr. Reynolds had organized a special presentation highlighting the measurable impacts of their program. The statistics were impressive. Patient satisfaction scores had risen dramatically across all demographic groups, emergency room wait times had become more equitable, and health outcomes had improved significantly. A young nurse shared a touching story during the event. She had been a medical student during the original incident and had felt helpless watching it unfold. Now, as a full-time staff member, she helped train new nurses in patient advocacy. "We learned that speaking up isn't just about pointing out what's wrong," she explained. "It's about working together to make things right." The hospital's training program had evolved into something remarkable. New staff members didn't just watch videos about cultural sensitivity. They participated in interactive sessions where former patients shared their experiences. This personal approach helped healthcare workers understand the real impact of their actions and attitudes. During the afternoon panel discussion, Dr. Jung revealed something surprising. The emergency room's improved reputation had led to earlier patient visits for serious conditions. People who might have previously delayed seeking care due to fear of discrimination were now coming in when symptoms first appeared, leading to better treatment outcomes. Tommy's school healthcare club had grown into a nationwide youth advocacy network. They had developed a simple but powerful program where young people could practice communicating their medical needs effectively. The program had been so successful that it was being implemented in schools across the country. Stephen received an unexpected letter during the event. It was from a family who had faced discrimination at another hospital. Instead of reacting with anger, they had used Tommy's story as a guide for creating positive change. Their local hospital had now implemented similar protocols, creating a ripple effect of improvement. The most moving part of the day came when the hospital unveiled a new training center named after Tommy. The center would focus on teaching healthcare providers how to create environments where every patient feels safe, respected, and heard. "This isn't just about avoiding discrimination," Tommy said in his speech. "It's about building trust." Dr. Reynolds, who had once dismissed them from the emergency room, now traveled the country helping other hospitals implement similar changes. His personal transformation from being part of the problem to part of the solution made his message particularly powerful. "Sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our most important lessons," he often said. The anniversary celebration included a special segment about the ripple effects of their story. Hospitals in different countries had adapted their model to fit their local needs. The basic principles, respect, communication, and accountability, proved to be universal, transcending cultural and language barriers. A group of medical students presented research showing how the program had influenced their career choices. Many had chosen to specialize in emergency medicine specifically because they wanted to be part of this positive transformation in healthcare. They called themselves the next generation of patient advocates. The day concluded with a community dinner where patients, doctors, nurses, and administrators sat together, sharing stories and ideas for future improvements. The barriers that had once divided them had been replaced by bridges of understanding and cooperation. As the event wound down, Stephen and Tommy stood together looking at photos from 5 years ago. "You know what, Dad?" Tommy said. "When you chose not to fight back with anger that day, you actually fought harder for something better." His words captured the essence of their journey, that real change comes not from revenge, but from the persistent work of making things better. The story that began with discrimination in an emergency room had transformed into a movement for positive change in healthcare. It showed that even in the face of injustice, choosing constructive action over destructive reaction can lead to lasting improvements that benefit everyone. As visitors left the anniversary celebration, they carried with them not just new ideas and protocols, but a powerful message: that the best response to discrimination isn't revenge or violence, but the patient, persistent work of creating positive change. Stephen and Tommy's story had become more than just an example of overcoming bias. It had become a blueprint for transforming healthcare through understanding, cooperation, and dedication to improvement.